The knock on my door came at exactly 11:43 p.m. 3 sharp knocks. Not frantic. Not hesitant. Just the certain. I remember staring at the clock on the microwave, as if the glowing green numbers might explain why my chest suddenly felt tight. Nobody visits a 60-year-old man at midnight unless something is broken, or someone is. For 7 years, I had imagined this moment in 1,000 different ways. In some versions, the phone rang and a stranger told me it was too late. In others, she never came at all. But in none of them did I expect to open the door and see my daughter standing there, soaked in rain, mascara running down her cheeks, looking like she had just escaped something she couldn't survive alone. When she lifted her eyes to mine, I didn't see the woman who once told me not to come to her wedding. I saw my little girl. And the first words out of her mouth were the ones I had waited 7 years to hear. "Dad, I should have listened to you." But before I tell you why she came back that night, and what she had endured in the years I wasn't allowed to see, you need to understand what it feels like when your own child chooses someone else over you. Because that part is where the real story begins. Welcome to my YouTube channel Whisper Stories, where silence speaks. My name is Jaxon Reed, and I am 60 years old. At 60, you think you've already survived the worst kinds of silence. You think you understand distance, pride, regret. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own daughter's voice turns into a wall. The day she told me not to come to her wedding, the world didn't shatter loudly. It cracked quietly, like ice beneath your feet, just before you realize you're already falling. "Dad, don't come," she said softly over the phone. "Michael says it's too complicated." Too complicated. 7 years later, she stood on my doorstep at midnight, trembling in the rain, and whispered words that tore open everything I had buried. "Dad, I should have listened to you." But before I tell you about that night, I need to tell you how a father learns to live without his daughter. The phone call that changed everything. Her name is Emily. When Emily was little, she used to fall asleep on my chest while I read her stories. She'd grip my shirt in her tiny fists like she was afraid I'd disappear. Back then, I believed I would always be her safe place. Her mother passed away when Emily was only 12. Cancer, quiet and cruel. After that, it was just the two of us against the world. I learned how to braid hair from YouTube. I burned pancakes until I finally got them right. I attended every school recital, every science fair, every awkward middle school dance where she pretended not to see me watching from the parking lot. When she graduated college, I cried harder than she did. Then she met Michael. The man who smiled too smoothly. Michael was charming, too charming. He shook my hand with confidence that felt rehearsed. His smile never reached his eyes. He spoke about ambition and strategy like life was a business deal. Emily looked at him like he hung the stars. "Dad, he's different," she'd say. I wanted to believe her. I tried, but something in my chest tightened every time he subtly corrected her in public, every time he interrupted her mid-sentence, every time he made small jokes about her being too emotional. They weren't loud red flags. They were whispers. And sometimes whispers are harder to fight. "Dad, don't come." The week before the wedding, I noticed her voice had changed. It carried hesitation. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Of course," she replied quickly. 3 days later, my phone rang at 10:17 p.m. "Dad," she began. The silence between us felt heavy. "I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding." I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke. "What?" "Michael says it might create tension." "Tension?" I repeated, feeling something cold crawl up my spine. "He feels like you don't approve, and we just want the day to be peaceful." Peaceful? So my presence was chaos. "Emily," I said carefully, "this is your wedding. I'm your father." "I know," she whispered, "but it's complicated." There it was. Too complicated. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I said something I'll regret forever. "If that's what you want." But it wasn't what she wanted. I know that now. The wedding I didn't attend. On the day of her wedding, I wore the suit I had bought months earlier. I sat alone in my living room. At 4 p.m., I imagined her walking down the aisle without me. At 4:15, I imagined someone else giving her away. At 5 p.m., I poured a drink I didn't want. I kept my phone beside me, hoping she'd call and say, "Dad, please come." She never did. Later that night, I saw photos online. She was smiling, but her eyes looked tired. The silence of 7 years. After the wedding, the calls became less frequent. At first, she'd call once a week. Then once a month. Then holidays only. Michael didn't like her visiting alone. There was always a reason. "We are busy. We have plans. Maybe next month." I heard it in her voice, carefulness. Like she was choosing words that wouldn't echo somewhere else in the room. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to drive to their house and demand answers. But she was married now. And I told myself she was an adult. So I did the hardest thing a father can do. I waited. The signs I ignored. In year 3, she mentioned she'd quit her job. Michael thinks it's better if I focus on home. In year 4, she stopped posting photos with friends. In year 5, she missed Thanksgiving. He says it's too far to drive. They lived 40 minutes away. In year 6, she sounded smaller. Have you ever heard someone shrink over the phone? It's not the volume. It's the spirit. I wanted to say, "Come home." But I was afraid if I pushed, she'd pull away forever. So I chose patience over pride. And silence over confrontation. Sometimes I wonder if that was a mistake. 7 years later. It was raining that night. I was sitting in my kitchen reading when I heard a knock at 11:43 p.m. Nobody visits at that hour unless something is wrong. I opened the door. And there she was. Emily. Soaked pale, eyes red. For a second, I saw my 12-year-old daughter standing there again, holding her backpack too tightly. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't ask questions. I pulled her inside. She collapsed into my arms. And for the first time in 7 years, she cried the way she used to when she scraped her knee. Unfiltered, broken, safe. You were right. We sat at the kitchen table. I made her tea like I used to. Her hands trembled around the cup. "He controls everything," she said quietly. My jaw tightened, but I stayed silent. "He reads my messages, he checks my calls, he says it's because he loves me." The words made my stomach twist. "He told me you were trying to turn me against him, that you didn't want me happy." I felt a familiar ache behind my ribs. "He said if I kept seeing you, it would ruin our marriage." And I understood. Too complicated. It wasn't about tension. It was about control. "I lost myself, Dad," she whispered, little by little. I reached across the table and held her hand. "You're not lost," I said, "you're here." The courage to leave. She had left that night after he smashed her phone during an argument. It wasn't the first time he'd yelled. It wasn't the first time he'd broken something. But it was the first time she realized the next thing he might break could be her. I was scared, she admitted. "You don't have to be anymore," I told her. I wasn't angry at her. I wasn't angry at myself. I was angry at the years she spent thinking she had to choose between love and family. No one should have to make that choice. Starting over. The divorce was messy. Michael tried to manipulate the narrative. He painted her as unstable. But truth has a way of surfacing. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years stepped forward. Messages she had saved quietly became evidence. And through it all, she stayed at my house. Sometimes she'd wake up from nightmares. Sometimes she'd sit quietly in the backyard, staring at nothing. Healing is not loud. It is slow. But every morning, she looked a little more like herself. The conversation that broke me. One afternoon, she found the suit I had worn on her wedding day. It was still in the back of my closet, untouched. "Why do you still have this?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Because I thought maybe one day I'd walk you down an aisle." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I shook my head. "You were trying to survive." And that's when I realized something important. Love isn't about being right. It's about being there when someone finally sees the truth. The apology I didn't need. A week later, she sat across from me and said, "Why didn't you fight harder?" The question surprised me. "I was afraid," I admitted. "Of what?" "Of losing you completely." She cried again. "I thought you didn't care." Those words cut deeper than the wedding. All those years of silence. And she thought I didn't care. That's the danger of distance. Silence can look like indifference. Rebuilding. It's been a year since she came home that night. She has her own apartment now. She's working again. She laughs more freely. Last month she introduced me to someone new. Not serious, just coffee. But she looked at me first, like she wanted my opinion. Not because she needed permission, but because she valued my presence. That small glance healed something in me. The night she said it. A few weeks ago, we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "Dad." "Yeah. Thank you for never saying I told you so." I smiled. That would have been too complicated. She laughed. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound forced. The moral. If you are a parent reading this, listen carefully. Control rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it disguises itself as love. And if you are a child, remember this. The people who truly love you will never make you choose between them and your family. 7 years ago, my daughter told me not to come because it was too complicated. But love isn't complicated. Pride is. Fear is. Manipulation is. Love waits. Love leaves the porch light on. Love keeps the suit in the closet. My name is Jaxon Reed. I am 60 years old, and I learned that sometimes the strongest thing a father can do is keep the door unlocked and wait.